second part of development management, which is specifically to look at item 8 on our agenda, and welcome to all the other members of the council who have also joined us as well. I'm going to ask, just before we start, that we need to take that roll call of committee members just to ensure that we are still quorate and that all can still be heard. So I'm not sure if that's Mr. White or Mrs. Hall, but over to whichever one of you it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Crozier.
Present. Excuse me.
Thank you. Councillor Hipsey.
Sorry, still finishing off my sandwich. I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Vachon.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Yelland.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Cheadle.
Sorry, I was on mute. I'm here.
Thank you. And for members of the public, I just clarify that we also have councillors Bridgewater, Edmonds, Spettigue, Moody, Wood, Daniel, Jury, Southcott and Leach on the in the meeting, and also officers present are Andy Bates, the Chief Executive, Pat Weimer, Head of Planning, David Fairburn, the Solicitor, Darrell White, Democratic Services Manager, Steve Molyneux, Deputy Chief Executive, and myself, Cathy Hall. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So before we actually just make a start, I'm not going to go through all the housekeeping. We generally go right at the start of development management, but I would ask members just to remember that if you are going to put anything in the chat, can you just use it to indicate if you wish to ask a question, or when we get to the right stage to enter into debate. And just as say for members of the public, normally development management committee meetings, only the members of the committee can actually speak, or the registered speakers. But because of the interest and the importance of this report that's coming forward today, all members have been offered the opportunity to come in. All members will have opportunity to ask questions and speak if they so wish, but the actual voting will still be restricted to members of development management only, in line with our constitution. So I do hope that does make sense. We have a presentation up on our screen, and I am now going to ask Mr. Fairburn, I believe it is, if he could take this forward. Thank you.
Hello, Chair. It's Councillor Jory here. I'm actually going to introduce the report with a few words at the start, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Chair and members. Like many members, I was concerned about the circumstances surrounding the decision to grant outline planning permission to the Plymouth Road site without reference to the DMNL committee. Some initial inquiries revealed additional concerns, and as a result, the Chief Executive and I asked Mr. Fairbairn to conduct an investigation and produce a report. The result of that report is in front of you, and is, in my view, a comprehensive and thorough appraisal, and makes some very worthwhile recommendations. My thanks go out to Mr. Fairbairn and those others who assisted with its completion. Our intention in requesting this report was to understand how this position was reached, and to examine what could be done to ensure that we put in place the right processes, training and culture to improve the work that the Council does in this very important area. Our priority is not to apportion blame, but to recognise where the process has fallen short of our and the community's expectations, and to consider options and recommendations to improve how we operate in this area in future. In doing so, we must recognise that we all, members, officers, consultees, town and parish councils, have a role to play in this process. It's especially important for us, I think, as a council to consider our relationship with the towns and parish councils, and the report contains suggestions about how to constructively engage in these issues. It has also brought into sharp focus, if we didn't realise it already, the interest that the community has in the efficiency and appropriateness of Section 106 agreements covering things like infrastructure, community services and public transport. The importance of these agreements is fully recognised and will form part of our future plans. I'm going to hand over now to the lead member for the environment, Councillor Caroline Mott, and ask her to introduce Mr Fairbairn. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair and Leader. First of all, I would like to thank everyone involved in the writing of this report. It has been an immense piece of work and has been presented in a very clear and concise way by Mr Fairbairn. This report aims to improve the planning provision at West Devon and our interaction with all involved in the process. And my hope is that the recommendations as proposed make the process clearer for all involved, and also that we all have a responsibility to make our views known. With that, I would like to hand over to Mr Fairbairn for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Mott, and thank you to Councillor Jolly as well. Whilst we're in the mode for thank yous, can I also thank all those who made a contribution to the report. Every contribution was considered and appreciated. I think it's important to start by saying, well, what was the purpose of the review? And to make sure that people understand that it was about making or looking at improving the way that we make our decisions in respect of planning applications. It wasn't a revisit of the grant of the outline planning permission. That is a valid planning permission and remains in existence. The report of the review is set out at Appendix A of the committee papers, and the review recommendations themselves are set out in Appendix B. Since the publication of the covering report, we have had a letter from solicitors instructed by an adjoining landowner raising questions concerning the recommendation relating to the Section 106 agreement. That they're the ones set out in paragraph 5.3. What I propose is that at the conclusion of the presentation, that I would invite members to move into exempt session to receive and to consider legal advice in respect of those that challenge from the adjoining landowners solicitors, and then we'll reconvene into public session. So, without more ado, I'll move on to the background to the review. I think it's important, as I say, to remember this is not a review of the grant of the outline planning permission, but effectively the process, the application provides the backdrop to the findings and ultimately the recommendations that I make. The site is outlined in red on your screen. You'll see that it's adjacent to the 386, on the western side of the 386 as it runs from Tavistock down to Plymouth. The site is within the Dartmoor and Tavistock Southwest wards and is part of a wider allocation within the joint local plan. The site within the joint local plan includes the part where I'm indicating with the cursor. The joint local plan itself identifies the site plus that additional area of land as being suitable for in the order of 300 dwellings and 18,600 square meters of employment floor space. The application that was the subject of the outline planning permission was received in December 2018, and it was for outline planning permission with all matters reserved except for access. The proposal was for 250 dwellings and 2 hectares of commercial B1 use. The planning permission itself was granted in June 2020, and it was granted subject to conditions, and in particular a condition known as Condition 37, which requires the parties with an interest in the land to enter into a planning agreement in the form of the agreement attached to the planning permission, substantially in the form of the agreement attached to the planning permission prior to the commencement of development, with some exception in respect of certain works. That decision was taken under delegated powers by officers, and following that decision, there were a number of concerns raised about the delegation, about the deliverability of the employment land, education contributions, the absence of contributions being required for certain things which had been features of other major development sites within Tavistock, and also on the drafting of the Section 106 agreement. And that it was at that point that it was agreed that there would be a review. The facts subject, other than those that I've very quickly outlined there, are set out in the review. And given that the purpose of the review is not to analyse the planning application as such and the decision, but to focus on how we can improve or learn lessons from how we handle that application, I think I'm going to focus on the recommendations in paragraphs 5.1, 5.2, and then 5.4 to 5.19 of the review. And then as I go through those, I'm going to pick out the material facts where appropriate to potentially explain and elaborate on why I'm making the recommendation that I am. So the recommendations are aimed at, and I think they conveniently group down into 4 different groups: giving members more information about planning applications, ensuring that decisions on planning applications are taken on a sound basis, making the council's decision-making arrangements clearer and more accountable, and encouraging proactive and constructive working with town and parish councils on planning applications. And one could actually also say all tiers of local government in respect of working on planning applications. So I move on and deal with the giving members more information. Now, the first of those is to provide more regular updates on significant applications. I think it's fair to say that the members were not taken by surprise, but because there'd been an election between the application being submitted and it's being determined, then we didn't provide as many updates as we perhaps should have done. And what I think is important is that members are provided with the right information. And reflecting on that, it's been agreed that members of the planning committee will be provided with an update by the head of planning at the conclusion of each meeting, and those that update is to be about applications that are significant and have significant implications in terms of the public interest, likely to be controversial, or to be of benefit to the borough, for example, job creation. In addition, the update will include progress on the details of Section 106 agreements. And the reason for that is that the often planning decisions are, particularly at committee and indeed under the delegated scheme, are approved subject to the completion of an agreement, and potentially these agreements can take time. They can be very complicated, and as a result there can be a lapse of time between the approval being given and the decision coming at the agreement being concluded. And as a result, it's important, I think, that members are given information about how the agreement is progressing. So again, matters aren't taken by surprise. I'm also suggesting that in respect of amendments to planning applications, ward members are advised of amendments to planning applications in their ward, so that in the event they are approached by applicants, members of the public, or town and parish councils, they have the information to hand to respond. I mentioned that the determination of this particular application crossed between two councils, so that there was an election in May of this year, and as a result new members were elected, and I think one of the things that would be helpful to newly elected members is to have included as part of their induction process information relating to planning applications in their wards. I think also it's a useful opportunity to remind members that effectively that we are one council. We each have officers and members have different responsibilities, but there are responsibilities in connection with the determination of planning applications that fall on members, and that does involve monitoring the weekly list of planning applications and also monitoring emails. But I think one thing that we would say is that the emails will need to be given a degree of priority, but I'll come back to that in terms of one of the later recommendations. On completion of Section 106 agreements, having said that we'll provide updates as part of the regular update to members of the Management and Licensing Committee, we'll also include ward members on the circulation list of a completion email once a Section 106 agreement is completed, so that members are then aware of the details of the planning obligations that are to be delivered by the development in their wards, and that of course in turn will assist in enforcement in due course should that be necessary. But equally it also means members are aware of what is going on, and they are able therefore to answer constituents' questions should they arise. The next recommendation concerns the website, and one of the issues that arose as a result of this particular application was that that representations were made by the two ward councillors at the time, Councillors Parker and Councillors Evans, which didn't ultimately appear on the council's website. And I think it's important that such representations, and indeed all representations that we receive, are uploaded to the website in a timely manner, so that members of the public have up-to-date information on which to base their representations, and also it aids their understanding of why applications are changed, why amendments are made to drawings, etc. So that's something which I will recommend quite strongly. The final point on this slide, the question of software, is an odd one to appear here, but I said when I was describing the site that it crossed two ward boundaries, the Dartmoor ward and the Tavistock Southwest ward. When the application was registered, the software that we used recognised that it was in the Tavistock Southwest ward, and then populated all of the template documents with that, but omitted, but failed to include Dartmoor ward. As a result, when the application came to be decided under delegated powers, officers consulted only the Tavistock Southwest ward members and did not consult with the Dartmoor ward councillor. As a result, that meant that the decision was outside the scheme of delegation. And whilst it doesn't affect the validity of the planning permission, it nevertheless is a defect in the process. Now we are in the process of updating a new software, and it's a recommendation that the software will be acceptance tests will include tests that will be designed to avoid this error happening again. So if I can move on now to the next group of recommendations, which are about ensuring decisions on planning applications are taken on a sound basis. This is about, again, ensuring members are provided with the right information or sufficient information on which to base a decision, and equally it's about ensuring members of the public understand why a decision is being made in the way that it is. So at the moment we have a report template, for example, that puts the planning policies as a footnote almost at the end of the report. And given that the starting point for the determination of a planning application is the development plan, then it seems sensible to at least rearrange the order so that those policies appear at the forefront of the report. I think what I would look at, I'm going to be suggesting, is that we review the template so it actually encourages more analysis and questioning, and therefore we'll be looking to summarise representations in most cases, and if the full consultation response is required, then we'll provide links that are incorporated into the report. But one of the things that I think is that arises from the application is the need to be more questioning and challenging of the information that's provided by applicants, by consultees, and certainly where there is an obvious discrepancy between those representations, seeking to identify whether one is erroneous or the reasons why the two conflicting opinions have been produced. And if those opinions can't be reconciled, then explaining them in the report. The other thing that again links perhaps to the website is just simply making sure that the version and date of clearance by the officer is clearly identified on the report. And also in the case of significant or complex applications, they are cleared by the head of planning or another senior specialist planner. And so that will ensure that there's a degree of quality control. So what and linking to that, I've identified the factors I think we should take into account when deciding what we mean by complex or significant applications that will require the input of or the overseeing of the head of planning or the senior planning specialist before applications are determined. And the final thing about the template is to avoid the use of acronyms or to at least keep them to a minimum, because apart from anything else, they're confusing not just to members but also to members of the public who don't necessarily have the same level of knowledge or background. And indeed, it is a recommendation that was made by the Planning and Advisory Service Review in 2018, and it's just a reminder that that's what needs to happen. And the next point is about the heads of terms of Section 106 agreements. In many cases, it's possible to have simplified terms set out in the report because they're not complicated. But if those heads of terms are not right, then or they're not. It's important that before we draft a Section 106 agreement, that the heads of terms are right, and it's therefore suggested that in more complicated applications, there may be more formal drafting of heads of terms. Again, this is to aid understanding of what's proposed, and also should there be a subsequent departure from what's agreed, it will be easier to identify. So the third group is making the council's decision-making arrangements clearer and more accountable, and essentially this is about revisions to the scheme of delegation. And so I'm suggesting that revisions should be made to clarify the circumstances in which the head of planning should or can refer an application of his own volition to the planning, to the Development Management and Licensing Committee. I'm also going to suggest, I'm also suggesting, I should say, a further recommendation to exclude from the head of planning's delegated powers those applications where the council will have the right to acquire an interest in or over all or any part of the land to be developed. In the present, and that's triggered by the fact that the council has the potential in the Section 106 agreement as drafted to acquire the employment land fully serviced, but to acquire the right, if it so wishes, to acquire the land for £1. Any decision, I have to say, whether the council would want to do that would be subject to some further approval through the committee process. And also suggesting term changes in the scheme of delegation to ensure consistency in terminology, and importantly, in terms of where members are involved, I'm suggesting that the period, which is currently 3 days, where members are invited to say whether they want to refer the application to committee or they agree with the application being determined under delegated powers, extending that period to probably 5 days. That will recognise that sometimes members are otherwise incapacitated and unable to respond, but it will require a positive response from members if the officers are then not to proceed with exercising their delegated powers. I'm also suggesting amendments that will require the head of planning to reconsult ward members where there is a difference in the terms of the heads of terms agreed and the final Section 106 agreement. In the present case, the education contribution changed from being a simple sum per dwelling to enabling a certain quota to effectively, or be the education contribution only being payable above 166 dwellings. And the other thing, which comes back to my point earlier about agreements taking time to complete, where members have agreed, usually through the committee, to grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement being completed within a period of time, then if it's not completed within a period of time, then ward member and equally where ward members have agreed to deal with the decision under delegated powers, they will be invited to decide to say whether they want to refer the application to the committee or not, because obviously there's been a time lag and circumstances move on. So reconsultation with ward members in specified circumstances is an important part of monitoring the progress of applications. The final group of recommendations concerns our working with town and parish councils. I should say in this present case, there was no that we followed our standard practice of consulting with town and parish councils, but I still think that there are improvements that can be made. And I think it's what I'm suggesting is a memorandum of understanding, which effectively will identify the respective roles and expectations of each other. So there'll be an understanding about what details we will provide, what we will expect by way of return in terms of consultation responses, the circumstances in which we'll consult about amended plans, speaking at Development Management and Licensing Committee, and also explaining the role of ward members in liaising with town and parish councils. I think that's a positive way forward, and I think codifying what might be a number of already existing streams in one source will help focus attention and will, I think, ultimately improve the working relationships between our town and parish councils and ourselves. Chairman, those are the recommendations, and that's all I want to say at this particular point. I did say that I would say at the end of my presentation that I would invite members to agree to go into exempt session so that I can provide legal advice in respect of the remaining recommendations at 5.3 and the response to the solicitor's letter that we've received. Chairman, I'll leave it into your hands as to whether or not you are to propose and whether or not there's a seconder for that.
Thank you. I think we as members need to have a full picture, and I do appreciate that the public might feel excluded, but because of the nature of exempt items, that that is the way that it sometimes does have to be, and it will come back to this committee at a later date once those issues have been resolved. So for this committee to actually look at that. So I'm happy to propose that we do go into part 2. Is there a seconder for that, please, from within DM?
Happy to second, Chairman. Councillor Pearce here.
Thank you. Can we vote by exception on this one, Mr. White?
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody have any issues with going into part 2? Please could you indicate in the chat? There is nothing there, so I assume that's okay. So before we just take any further, could I ask part 1. Vicky, are you able to confirm if the mute button has been lifted? We're now back live with sound and vision. Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much to members of the public for your patience. I'm now just going to ask Mr. Fairbairn, because as a result of those discussions, there have been some revised recommendations, and I'm going to ask Mr. Fairbairn, in conjunction with Mr. White, just to highlight those to the committee, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understand that Mr. White has put or will be putting the revised recommendation on the screen. Essentially, there is a new recommendation 2, which says that the committee doesn't make a decision at this time in respect of the recommendations in respect of paragraph 5.3 of Appendix B, and agrees to receive a further report at the next meeting, and then they then go on to agree the recommendations set out in those numbered paragraphs, which are the process improvement recommendations. And then there is a consequential amendment in a new paragraph, recommendation 4, to reflect that the action plan is confined to those improvement recommendations. And then 5 is unaltered, and that's just about providing a progress report to overview and scrutiny in 6 months' time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, which of course hopefully should cause some reassurance for all members that even while you won't have the opportunity to vote on this committee, for those of you who are over in scrutiny, you will do. And I don't know if then the recommendations for an ONS are to go to full council or to go to the hub, but it should mean that pretty much every member is going to have an opportunity to speak to this item if they so wish. Oops, and it keeps jumping off. That's it, lovely, thank you. So Mr. Fairbairn, was there anything else you wish to bring in your presentation, or can we move to questions?
Not at this time, Chairman.
Thank you. So, members, do we have any question? Councillor Mott, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, please, the reasoning behind 5.10.4 with regard to extending the length of time for members to respond, because it's not that long ago that we moved from 5 days to 3 days in order for officers to be able to process planning applications in a timely manner. Surely if members are involved in the process and in discussion with planning officers over particular cases, they should be ready for that report to be coming in and be able to respond in a timely manner, and that would be within the 3 days rather than extending it back again.
Chairman, if I may. Yeah, I mean, there've been a number of issues, well, a small number of cases, oddly enough, across both councils where members have not either received or have not replied to emails within the three days, and it's felt that by extending it back to 5, it gives more time, but it also then puts the onus back on the member to reply to the email. And I think there's probably also something about officers flagging up those emails, because I understand that members obviously get a vast volume of emails on a daily basis. It's important that we just highlight that. But that's the rationale behind the extension.
And if my memory serves me correctly, at the time West Devon went back to 3 days, it was to come into line with how South Hams were operating, to try and have a fairly uniform scheme. That was one of the reasons back in 2016, 15, or whenever it was.
Yeah, I think, Chairman, there would be a move to, if these recommendations are agreed, to have a similar conversation with South Hams, so that we did have a uniformity once again. Yeah, I understand that might well be well received.
Thank you.
Then, if I may, Chair, can I ask then, these recommendations, are these bearing in mind that we share officers and resources, is this same report going before South Hams and the recommendations being voted on at South Hams equally?
They're not going at the same time, but there's obviously a need for a conversation within South Hams as to how we move these recommendations forward. So it's not going to be immediate, but there will be a conversation which hopefully will then lead to the same recommendations, but not obviously arising in the context of this particular application, but as in the context of you having agreed or made a decision to adopt the recommendations.
Okay, I think if I may then, Chair, that also needs to be part of the discussion, because I'm just aware that officers could possibly then be working across two separate policies effectively for each council, whereas most of our time recently, certainly in the last few years, has been spent aligning our policies to make it easier for officers.
Yeah, agreed. Councillor Spettigue, then Councillor Edmonds and Cheadle. Councillor Spettigue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I completely agree with Councillor Mott that we should be abreast of the affairs in our respective wards. And I just wondered whether or not, rather than extending the period of time allowed for a response, perhaps rather just a follow-up phone call in the event of a lack of response might be a more effective way of keeping business going for the officers, keeping their work moving, but also ensuring response.
It's an interesting thought. I think I suppose then it's putting the onus very much more back on the officers to do the chasing.
Oh, I see. I understand. Yeah.
So I think that might be slightly unfair.
No, fair comment. I haven't considered that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. My question concerns recommendation 5.6.2, which is on page 345 of the committee papers, and it reads, training is to be provided to members of the licensing committee. The question is, would the committee consider broadening this recommendation out to include all members, as we have an important role to play when considering planning applications, including Section 106 agreements? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's going to depend to some extent as to whether it's going to form part of the compulsory training, actually. Any training would obviously be offered to all, but if it's compulsory training, it would mean that it would be something that would have to be done by the DMNL members. Is this one for Mr. Fairbairn or for Mr. White, thinking it's a training one?
Good question. I think clearly it's compulsory for Development Management Licensing Committee members, but also potentially for substitutes as well. That probably wraps up quite a sizable portion of the membership of the council, to be honest. I can see there is an argument for making planning training compulsory for all members. It's a significant part of the workload, and having that understanding is probably very helpful. And I understand probably that there was compulsory training before. I mean, given that ward members have this involvement in significant involvement in delegation and how that operates, and needing to understand what they're being presented with, I can certainly see a very strong argument for that to be compulsory for all members.
I mean, currently we have training that is compulsory for all development management licensing members and substitutes, which is open to all members. But if you want to be on DMNL, you have to attend it. Then there is other training that comes out, which is sort of all member and DMNL focused. and I'm just wondering if this should go to potentially the detail of this should be looked at by the I can't remember what the working group is. It's a training development working group chaired by Councillor Ball, who look at what the training is and who receives it, what has to be delivered and to who.
Can I just add to that, Chair? Just to add on top of that, the only thing I'd say, we never ever exclude any members from any DMNO related training, and we do actively encourage all members because they do take part in the delegation process. So as we said earlier on, following induction, all members have to attend the 2 compulsory training sessions to take part in the process. But then thereafter, any top-ups or add-ons, we've always taken the view that all members should be invited at least, irrespective of being on the committee or not.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Evans?
Yes, I just feel that that one of the stated aims of this review is to improve the quality of our planning process. Surely it therefore follows that all members are given that opportunity, and certainly I know I would benefit from further training around some of the points that have been raised and discussed in this report. So I would welcome the opportunity to improve my knowledge and skills in that area, because these aren't easy matters, and particularly around section 106, and I really would want to feel confident that I have sufficient knowledge to be able to deal with these important issues in a competent manner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pop back to the discussion we had a minute ago about members being asked for authority to allow for decisions to be delegated to officers. And I think there's a dual responsibility here. Yes, we would expect officers to make an effort to get hold of members to seek this delegated authority, but equally we would expect members to be attentive to such requests. And David mentioned a suggestion that the email sent to members was flagged, and I'd like to see that made a substantive recommendation. But equally, I think if a member is sent a flagged email asking for delegation and chooses not to respond to it, then a mention of that in the officer's report should be made.
Thank you. Is there mention when ward members haven't replied? I think it already is, isn't it?
My understanding is it is, Chair, because it's on the bottom of the report, isn't it, as to whether members responded and what their response was.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's fine, but I think members need to be reminded that their name will be in lights for all the wrong reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle, not Councillor Cheadle, sorry, Councillor Pearce, you have comment. Do you want to ask a question, or did you want to reserve your comment for debate?
It's just comments on what's gone before. Yeah, I mean, if you're happy for me to bring it up in debate, that's fine. I'm quite happy to do that, Chairman.
That's fine, or you word it as a question, whichever.
No.
Okay. Members, do you have any further questions? Okay. In that case, I will move the recommendations, which are the revised recommendations, which has actually been, I think it's actually on the, yes, it's on the slide now. So I'm looking at my document. It is on the slide before you. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you. So members, we are now in debate. Anybody wish to speak?
Right. I'll go
Councillor
first.
Pearce, you want to kick off? Fine, lovely.
Thank you very much. Going back to the comments by members previously about the length of time from going from 3 days to 5 days, the situation arises sometimes when officers' reports or information comes out late on a Friday, and if members are away at the weekend, and then you've got to, you're back on Monday to pick it up. I can see where the comments are coming about if members are involved with what's going on, but not always are you able to deal with it at the weekend, which takes 2 days out of the 3. So I think we need to look at this very carefully. The other thing is, I'm strongly in favour of members having compulsory planning training, because I feel that it would help us when subs are needed, but more importantly, it would make members aware of their responsibilities and give them the knowledge of dealing with planning applications in their own ward. Thank you.
Thank you. And part of recommendation 4 is, it's bouncing around, is the head of planning prepares an action plan to implement recommendations, which will then be approved by the committee at its next meeting, and then it'll go through the ONS proper scrutiny procedure.
Which is good.
Yeah. So I've then got, I've got Councillor Hipsey, please.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'd like to agree with Councillor Pearce. It seems to me that of all the functions of the council, probably the area that is more important in terms of getting it right and the consequences of not getting it right is in fact planning, as I've found over the last 18 months. And I really don't think we can overdo training in planning for all members. So that's one point I'd like to make. The other one is more simple. I'm still extremely surprised and very disappointed with the fact that the Dartmoor ward was not included in this application, or at least the Dartmoor ward member was not included. It seems to me that the council has perfectly good interactive mapping on the website. It's available for the public to use. It's relatively easy to use. It shows ward boundaries, and it doesn't seem to be beyond expectations for officers just to use it and give a visual check, a manual check to the software that is telling them it's one ward boundary or another. I'd also go as far as to say it's the sort of information that would be usually put on the plans that the planning officers create as part of their reports. So if there's a ward boundary, to my mind, it should appear along with the red line on the plan that is issued. I don't know whether that's possible. It seems pretty easy to me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle and Councillor Mott.
Yes, it's a comment with a question mark at the end. Looking at those recommendations, the recommendation 5 to note that the a report will come back to ONS. There's no timescale on it. Are we happy that this could come back in 2 years' time?
It says in 6 months' time, Councillor Cheadle.
Does it? Not on my screen, it doesn't.
Oh, right, I'll read it. It says that it is recommended that the committee in item 5 notes the intention to bring forward a progress review of the planning improvement action. Sorry, your head is actually in the way. That's it.
Yeah, your head's right in the way of what I'm supposed to be.
Improvement action plan, future meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in 6 months' time.
Your head was right over the 6 months' time.
I apologise for that, Councillor Cheadle. I moved my head to the side.
Thank you.
I'm ducking. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a matter of clarity for Councillor Pearce, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but my understanding was that it was 3 working days as opposed to 3 calendar days that we have to respond to officers.
That is correct.
Thank you. So if it moves to 5, it would be 5 working days.
Point noted.
Somebody goes away for the weekend, you'll have Monday to Friday to respond. I'm looking on the chat. I don't have anybody else there. Anybody else wish to take part in debate? Okay, then we will move this to the vote then. Again, this is just the Members' Development, Management and Licensing will vote on this. I'm going to check Mr. White on this. Do we need to do this on a roll call, or do we do it by exception?
I think due to the nature of the issue, Chair, and in light of there being a number of people aware of viewing the stream online, I think it'd be more transparent to do it as a roll call. Thank you.
That's what I thought it probably would be. Okay, so if you agree with the recommendations, you're going to vote for or against or abstain. So we'll go by roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cheadle.
For the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier. Councillor Crozier. Councillor Crozier. Councillor Hipsey.
I can confirm that I've been present throughout the debate and I vote for.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe.
I'm for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Vachon.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Yelland.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Crozier.
I can't see him in the participants list. I think he might have dropped out.
Oh, yes, he has. He's dropped out. So we've got eight for, and one that is obviously missing at the moment. Chair, thank you.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So that is carried then. Okay, well, thank you to everybody who has come out for that, and also thank you, as has already been said by others, to all who have contributed into what was actually an extremely comprehensive report. And it's good to know that there is some positive stuff going to come out of this, which is absolutely brilliant. Now, before members of DM run away, we haven't finished. We still have the planning performance indicators on item 6 and the planning appeals update on item 7. So I'm going to ask Mr. Weimer if you could do the planning performance indicators, please.
Thank you, Chair. If you just bear with me 1 second. I'll just give us the opportunity to bring those up in front of them. So it's on pages 17 to 19 of the agenda item 6. Okay, these I know these were brought to committee relatively recently, but these have been updated to include the second quarter of this year, so up to the end of September. So if I start at the top on the application, the top two bar graphs, the applications on majors and non-majors on target, other than the one blip in quarter 4 of the last year, we're on target for both. Then the next one down is workload. Workload is quite an interesting one at the moment.
Can I just stop you a minute,
yep.
Mr. Weimer? Yeah, I've just seen the note from Councillor Cheadle. Yeah, this isn't actually on the screen. It's on your agenda. It's on the public reports pack as opposed to the supplement item.
Okay, I thought Pat was going to put it on the screen.
I can do if you want. If that's easier.
I don't mind.
Save flicking between machines.
Okay, bear with me a second. That's bizarre. It's disappeared. Presumably you can't. Can you see the performance indicators?
No, we can see.
No, I'll go back to the report.
No, I just don't. I've gone to present and they've just completely disappeared from. Here we go. Oh, how's that?
Yeah, that's it. You got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start again. So the top two bar graphs show our performance on majors and non-majors as reported to the government, and we're above target on both of those. Clearly, as I mentioned before, we do need to do some more work around getting them out without extension of time, but that will come forward as we make it. I'm hopeful that the new IT system will give us some efficiency savings that will help on that. Then the ones below the workload. So if I work on the WDP7, so what this doesn't show, but I can give you the figures in the the total number of applications we've received this year, so I'm talking calendar year, so from January to the end of September, is in many ways somewhat surprising. It's 7% up on what we were on the same time this year. So any dip in numbers that happened when we first went into the lockdown in March, April, that shortfall has been has been overtaken. We are now 7% up. So that is, when you're looking at across the team, we do, and it's a similar figure in Southam. So when you look across the team, we deal with about just over 3,000 applications. A 7% increase in actual numbers is quite a significant increase. But the workload is up overall. The on hand is a relatively flat line, so WDP8, which is pleasing. It means we are the numbers of applications we're getting in, we're getting out the same number. So although we've got an increase in numbers, the overall on hand work isn't going up, and the numbers determined on table P9 is a little bit all over the place for this year, and the fundamental reason for that is that when we first went into lockdown in March, April, because we then had to revisit how we were doing publicity, how we're doing sign notices. We put a hold on doing consultations until we were happy that the parish councils could meet remotely. So there was a reduction in numbers going out because of that. Then that's then caused a spike in June, which was all of those ones then catching up. So it's a bit of an unusual graph for this year on numbers determined, but that was simply a product of lockdown. Before I move on to fees, I'll happily answer any questions on sort of workload first.
Do any DM members have any questions? Councillor Cheadle.
It's a quick one, Pat. Not really on the graphs, but
Right.
We have had a discussion on and off about whether we can conduct site visits, and I wondered if that had gotten anywhere.
What committee site visits?
Yeah.
I think that's incredibly difficult at the moment with the various rules around social distancing and rule of six and everything. Because whilst I think you could have an argument that it's work, it doesn't matter. You've got no control over members of the public turning up, or not just being on site, but being at the site. We've all been to site visits where there's been quite a few members there. Quite a few members of the public or parish councillors there. And I think under current circumstances, it's very difficult to see how that could be organised and be within the various social distancing and coronavirus rules.
Okay.
I'd happily, if any members have got any suggestions on how we do that, but I think it's incredibly challenging, and I can't think of a way how we could do it and not be criticised for not sticking to the rules that everyone should be in terms of social distancing.
Well, it's a suggestion, but I'm not sort of pushing it. If there's a planning application coming to the committee where in normal times we would have conducted a site visit, it might be appropriate for the office to say, if you choose to visit the site on your own just to get an appreciation of the topography or whatever it is, then please do, something along those lines.
Okay.
If making the determination is easier if you've seen it, then it might be a suggestion. That's all.
Okay. There's nothing to stop members going to have a look at the site, but of course you've got no right to go onto the site. You can only see it from public viewpoints, and you'd have to be incredibly careful if you got accosted, for want of a better word, by either the applicant or a member of the public, and started then inadvertently discussing the case. And so I think that I'm aware that of a couple of members who have gone out to see sites simply because it's part of the district they weren't familiar with. They just had almost I wouldn't say a drive-by, but a little bit more than that, but went just to have a quick look just so they could familiarise themselves with the area. And the other thing, perhaps we can have a look at
what we're doing in terms of presentations. I know we're being quite careful to make sure that you've got a very good set of photographs so you can appreciate the sites. And I think for the two this morning, I think the photographs provided on both of them did give you a really good understanding of the site context and what was around it and the topography and everything.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's perhaps the answer.
But we'll have a think. I'll have a further think about that.
Is it worth? I know Councillor Moy sits on Dartmoor National Park. I don't know. I think they're doing site visits, aren't they? So whether probably outside this, because it's not part of the planning indicators, but it might be worth having that conversation and seeing what Dartmoor National Park are doing.
Yes, yeah, they had an outside one actually, and they also had an inside one, a large application at Buckfast Abbey. I didn't go to that because I felt slightly uncomfortable about it, but they are trying to get them going, certainly.
Yeah, and that is part of the difficulty actually, is if we have members of DM who have got underlying health conditions and so are needing to take extra precautions, they would be effectively disadvantaged. So anyway, further discussions need to be had around it, I think. So anyway, back to the performance indicators.
I think. Sorry, Chairman. If I just want to add, if anybody calls an application to committee, we are specifically asking them through when we have in the mediation meetings, are there any particular viewpoints that you think members need to view this from? And if there are, and we haven't got photographs, we are going back to take those photographs. So we're trying as hard as we can to make sure that you've got all the information that you need to be able to make a determination. Unfortunately, we are living through some quite challenging times, and this is one of the knock-ons, I'm afraid. Okay, so if it's okay with you, Chairman, I'll go to the next section. So,
before you do, Mr. Weimer, sorry, Councillor Hipsey's put an indication of commenting in the box as well.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there, Councillor Hipsey. I do apologise. It's on the performance indicators, I hope. Yes.
Yes, thanks, Chair. In fact, it was a follow-on from Councillor Cheadle's question about site visits and Mr. Weimer's response about photographs. I don't know whether you're still with us, but Councillor Moody made a suggestion, it's a bit out in left field, but about the possibility of using drone footage for the period during which we know we can't go and have a look at these, whether we get more of an idea of the location and so on from a drone. That might be a bit too much to digest and consider, but it's an idea, suggestion.
I think we get into Ripper territory. What I don't want to do is start a debate, particularly on site visits, because what we're actually doing here is looking at performance indicators. So I'm going to bring it back to the performance indicators, and this might be something we need to have a further discussion about. Maybe it's an informal council or something to see how this can be worked out.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Weimer, carry on.
Thank you. The two tables in respect of fee income, you'll note that the Q2 there was a drop in fee income from Q1, but Q1 was significantly higher than we would have anticipated if you're looking at the 1920 black line. So the fee income in West Devon is still slightly up on what it was last year. That is actually bucking the trend for most southwest authorities. Most southwest authorities' income is less, even though applications are up, because there's been across the board there's been a drop off in major applications, but there's been a significant increase in the household applications, the minor applications, and the anecdotal evidence is that there's a significant number of applications into modify, adapt, extend dwellings to provide home offices. I suppose not understandably, but at the moment the fee income is in West Devon is healthy. In terms of pre-app free income, the reason it was 0 in Q1 is we had to revisit how we would do pre-apps during lockdown. Well, a combination of lockdown and revisiting what was priority and what wasn't priority during that time. We then started doing pre-ups again, and income is coming back up. I'm not concerned about pre-up income. I think it will hit the targets we were setting in the budget. And in terms of the figures for pre-ups received, you'll note that in September this year we've had more pre-ups in than we had the previous 2 years. So I still think it's an upward trend. Hence why the workload is gradually going up, but nowhere near as steep as the numbers coming in. So we're getting through them. The way we deal with them is slightly different now. There's predominantly one officer is responsible for all pre-ups, and she's getting through those a lot more efficiently. And there's very much less delays in getting back to people with pre-ups, and then the number of pre-ups closed raised significantly in April, May. That's we weren't getting any new ones in, so we're able to close down though a lot of the older ones, and then there's a steady number being closed. So say the workload isn't going up, the overall caseload of open ones isn't going up significantly. So I'm broadly comfortable where we are with those. Before I move to enforcement, is there any questions on income or pre-ups? So when I'm presenting, I don't have the chat bar. I've got either the chat bar or the presentation. So if someone,
there's nothing there.
And okay, fine. I think that's the final screen. Finally, with enforcement, you'll notice in the last quarter, in the last 2 quarters have been the busiest quarters we've had since on that graph, and in the last quarter particularly, it's a really big spike in new enforcement cases received. Again, I think that's the message I'm getting from my equivalent people across the southwest, and we think it's because so many people are now are working from home all the time. They're actually potentially seeing quite a bit more or making more attention of it, and more complaints are coming in. But if I move to the E5, the right hand, whilst there's clearly been a spike in numbers coming in, there hasn't been such an uplift in cases outstanding. So we are still closing a significant number. So I wouldn't say it's not backlogs, it's new cases. So we're still getting on top of enforcement, but the numbers aren't going up as much as perhaps they would have been a couple of years ago if we had that number of that number of complaints in. Again, happily take any questions before I go to appeals.
Yeah, Councillor Moss has just indicated she has a question, I think, on pre-apps.
Sorry, yes, I was a bit slow on getting my fingers moving. It's just really, so if Pat can clarify, please, because obviously we get the pre-apps list in for us as members to look at and to be aware of any pre-apps that might be coming in. And I appreciate it was a South Hams member that raised the question as to why that information wasn't publicly available or why we were unable to discuss that. So I didn't know if Pat wanted to just address that for members' benefit, please, for clarity.
Okay. Members may recall that we had a revised pre-app process and protocol approved by the council, I'm going to say February this year, would be a guess. It was either January or February. And as part of that, one of the things we looked into is whether we should be making pre-application submissions public as soon as we got them. And what we decided is no, we shouldn't, because one, it would potentially stop a number coming in. And if I give you a scenario, if you've got, you own a business that employs a dozen people, and you are simply just thinking of nothing more, but just thinking of either an expansion or moving, going to a different site, that at the moment you're just exploring possibilities. If we made that public and your staff saw it and it started to destabilize or demotivate the staff, or staff decided to look to leave because they didn't want to move to that location, that really wouldn't be very fair, I don't think. So there's a degree of commercial confidentiality, but what we have agreed to do is that, and rightly so, is that as soon as any planning application comes in following pre-app, we will publish both the pre-app submission and our response on that application page on the website, so everybody is fully aware of what questions we were asked and what answers we gave. Councillor Mott, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you, Pat. Like I say, it was just really for members' clarity, because I did note that the question wasn't actually answered through the email process. So my assumption is that somebody actually got back to the South Hams member, and I just wanted to raise it in this forum so that everybody was clear on what the answer was and why we don't publish it.
Other South Hams members got back to that member before I had a chance to.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So that was resolved.
I'm saying my namesake probably dealt with that very well.
I think she was one of those that went back. I think, to be fair, there was a number of members went back straight away saying this is why, and it was fully explained in when it's discussed at ONS. So, and to be fair to that member, they were absolutely fine with it. They just either weren't there or had forgotten. I can't remember what. I think it was probably weren't there. Any other queries on PIs? If not, I'll go to.
There's no other questions, so I think we can go across to number 7, appeals, please.
Okay. Can you see this okay? Is
yes.
the appeals list now showing? Brilliant.
Yeah,
okay.
You can just see one at a time, so to speak, and that way.
That probably helps me, to be honest, because I then won't miss them, which I'm prone to do. Okay, so the top one, this 3154. I must admit, I thought this had been reported at the last meeting, and I think what possibly happened is somehow we managed to report on number 2 and not number 1. So members recall doing a site visit here, and actually, whilst it says the appeal was upheld, it was in line with the council's decision, because the inspector has dismissed the 2-storey extension on the property, has allowed for the garage at the back, which we were always happy with. Inspectors have the luxury of being able to do split decisions like that, whereas the council can't. But it was only refused on the basis of the extension. If you've got particular questions on any of these as they go through them, by all means jump in, because that's probably easier than going back. So the next one, I suspect that Councillor Cheetham might want to have a discussion on this one, because my reading of the Challock one is that the inspector, have I got the right one? The inspector basically said that the scheme would preserve the character and appearance of the area and the A and B, but the section 106 provided wasn't strong enough to demonstrate that there would be a local connection. So it was refused only because of the section 106 and not because of the impact on the character and appearance. So I think if they came back in with a stronger 106, I think would be struggling to then refuse it on impact on character and appearance.
I don't think that's. I read the inspector's report that it contravened the policies in the joint local plan.
But yeah, I did as well.
Yeah, but that was only because they didn't have a section 106 agreement saying that it would be someone from local connection. Well, that was my reading of it anyway.
Well, I didn't read it that way. I read it was just contrary to the policies in the joint local plan.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll bring this one back next time and go through it a little bit more in more detail.
Yeah,
or offline. It might not affect other members of the council, but this is the 3rd appeal he's had in a year on this site. My question was, can someone just endlessly put in planning applications and then go to appeal on them?
Yes, if they're different.
Yeah. Okay. He'll put in another one.
If you make the same application following an appeal, the authority have the ability to turn away the application. But if the application is different to what was refused on appeal, we don't have the ability to turn that away.
Well, sure as X is X, he'll come back again. So,
yeah, and what Councillor Cheddar, I'll go back through this again. We'll have an offline conversation about it. Yeah.
Yep, let's do that.
Okay. The next one at North Taunton, good decision, I think. It's a relatively small commercial unit. The argument put forward was that it's too small. It's too small. It's not viable. It's not needed. The inspector disagreed and said that you simply haven't demonstrated that there isn't still a need for this. There's not an awful lot of commercial premises there. There's certainly not an awful lot that are empty. So no, you can't turn it to a dwelling unless you prove otherwise. So I was really impressed with that decision. To be honest, the next one I was less impressed with from a personal point of view. This is one where
This is the one that I was shocked at, Pat, which I couldn't remember when I spoke to you at the last meeting. And I mean, the extent of upholding here was quite substantial.
Well, it I think that there was a number of reasons for refusal, not least that we weren't persuaded that they demonstrated they needed such a significant amount of development, so the two stables, hay store, tack rig, etc. That was one issue. The fact that it was on pretty much on the top of the hill, so the impact on the landscape was another one. And I read this quite carefully twice just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. But to my mind, the inspector really has kind of almost dismissed without considering the argument around, well, is there actually a need for this? And has basically said that the buildings will have a muted colour, they'll be screened by a hedge, and therefore it's not obtrusive in the countryside, and it's acceptable. Rather than taking this as this is the way we should be going forward for buildings in the countryside, I'm going to put this down to in many ways a rogue decision. And I think if the same sort of thing came in elsewhere, I think I'd still want to argue it again, because I'm struggling with this one, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I was as well when I read it for the first time around, and I think the effect on the landscape is quite considerable, actually, knowing where it is. I
think this is one we need to go back when it's done to take pictures, just a learning exercise for us, because it may well be the inspector's got it right, and we've miscalculated the impact this will be. So this would be one to have a look at, to go back in a couple of years' time when it's done, just to see what the impact is, to be honest.
Yeah.
The next one I think is not a surprise that the farm building and the track at Lammerton was refused. Basically harm to the character and appearance of the area, and there's no overriding need.
That's right.
A good decision. The next ones are all. I just put members in the picture here. This is a bit of it'd be interesting to see how the inspector takes this. These are applications that Mr. Gibbons dealt with. So the first application is an application for 16 new holiday lodges. But at the same time as that application for 16 new holiday lodges, they were applying to lift the holiday restriction on existing buildings on the basis there's no need.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we've got the first appeal on 16 lodges, and the second appeals because we were to lift the holiday restriction on, if you look at this to lift the holiday restriction on 12 golf lodges. So it's interesting how they're going to argue to an inspector that they need 16 new ones at the same time as lifting the holiday restriction on 12 existing ones.
Does the planning inspector take them looking, obviously have to take each one separately, but would the planning inspector take it into account, or might they be allocated to different planning inspectors and wouldn't know?
I would be surprised if they're not dealt with by. In fact, I think they are being dealt with by the same inspector, and the same inspector at the same time, because it's a hearing. The other thing is, I'm just being reminded I may not get this strictly right, and it may be they're just lifting the connection to the hotel and golf club for the lifting the holiday restriction. But we'll see how that pans out.
It's certainly an interesting one.
It is. The last ones, I think the rest are all appeals. They're all TPOs that have been lodged, or applications have been lodged. So the last decision is at Heimer Wilmingstone, and the approval, which was through an appeal decision, had a planning condition on removing permitted development rates. The application came in to lift that condition that we refused. An inspector has allowed the appeal, so has lifted the planning condition on the basis that it wasn't reasonable, because if you go through all of the permitted development classes you could have on residential curtilage, a significant amount of it could not be done anyway because it's forward of the forward of the principal elevation of the dwelling house. So what the inspector is saying is in many ways the conditions serve no purpose, because you couldn't do substantial works through permitted development because of the location of the area. I'm not overly concerned by that. To be honest, the inspector's gone through it in quite some detail. But as a matter of course, I don't think we would have normally did a removal of PD rights condition that was imposed by an inspector. It's just one inspector's gone through it in a lot more detail than the previous one did. Yeah. Happily answer any questions, Chair, but that's it for the appeals.
Thank you. Any members have any questions? If not, then that just leaves me to say, I think, looking at the agenda and making sure I haven't missed anything, that that is our agenda completed. So declare the meeting closed at 3 o'clock. Thank you all very much indeed for your time. It has been a long day, and you've all done very well, in the words of youngster Grace. So thank you all very much indeed. Okay, and see you all again.
Yeah. Could I ask